This year I read the most books in a year that I have ever read. I'm about to tell you my top 10. Guys, I am sat in front of some of my new favourite books of all time. I am so excited to tell you about these books. But first, let me just say, I have spent an excruciating amount of time making this list. Like an embarrassing amount of time. Like it's not that serious, but I have spent forever making this list. Books have come off of the list, books have joined the list, books have changed places. It's been very dramatic. I've reached the point where I need to get a life and it's not that serious, and we're going with this. I love all 10 of these books with every fibre of my being. I think they are wonderful. I hope you're going to love them too. So we're going to chat about them. I can't believe that this has been my first full year of BookTube. That is so exciting. I just want to say a massive thank you to anyone who has been here along the journey. I genuinely love you so much. Whenever I see like repeat names pop up in my comments, I get so excited. I recognise everyone's handles and I know the people who have been here for ages, and it just warms my little heart when I see people who have been around for so long. So thank you for supporting me. Thank you for being here. I hope that I'm about to find you some new favourite books. Okay, we're gonna get started. I have read a lot of books this year. The next video that you see will be a video of every single book that I have read this year. I will give you the grand total in that video. We will go through every single one. It's probably gonna be a long video. These ones are the tip top of everything that I read. But before we get into the top 10, I have 2 honourable mentions that I would like to get to first. Both of these books are honourable mentions and not in the top 10 for the exact same reason, and that is because both of them are stunning, beautifully written, but not necessarily enjoyable books, purely because of the content. Both of them you absolutely need to check your trigger warnings for, but I did want to include them because I want to say how incredible they are, but I didn't necessarily enjoy them, if that makes sense. And those are A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara and My Dark Vanessa by Kate Elizabeth Russell. This book is like a stomach punch over and over and over again. We're following 4 characters living their lives in New York. You kind of centre on one specifically and you get all of his childhood, a lot of trauma, almost anything you can think of is probably in this book. It is incredibly hard hitting, but the character study is phenomenal. Similarly, with My Dark Vanessa, we're following Vanessa, who is a 15-year-old who is groomed by her English teacher. The trauma is written in the most incredibly complex way. Both of these books are stunning, but they are not enjoyable reads. They will break your heart. Please check your trigger warnings. Only go into both of these when you think you can. Honourable mentions for the exact same reasons, but I do love both of these books. Okay, and now we're getting into the top 10. In at number 10, we have a book that I read very recently. She's a late addition to the list. That is A Monster Calls by Patrick Ness. I just read this in a reading vlog that honestly probably only came out a video or 2 before this one. I knew going in that I loved this story. I've seen the play, I've seen the film, I loved both, I wept at both. Yes, I wept at this one. We absolutely made it a trifecta. This book follows Connor. His mother is very ill and she's getting treatment, and we follow Connor as he gets these dreams and nightmares. He has this one nightmare that he is trying to escape from, and then he starts getting visited by a magical tree. The magical tree tells him 3 stories, and then at the end he asks Connor to tell him this big secret that he has been hiding from everybody. This is, for such a tiny book, so powerful. It punches you in the gut. It is one of the most emotional books I've read all year. It is another one that I would probably check your trigger warnings for, but it is written in a sort of YA style. The character we're following is very young. I think he's around 13, but it feels, despite being quite a simple story, it feels so mature. It has such important conversations. This is a book that is going to stick with me for the rest of my life for sure. In at number 9, we have actually the only book on this list that I don't physically own. I would love to pick up a copy soon, and that is The Guest by Emma Cline. I'm pretty sure I read this in a getting out of a book slump video. Spoilers, but this is the book that got me out of it. This was my first Emma Cline book. I have since started, although not actually finished, her short story collection. I would love to get back to that, probably in the new year now, but that is tip top of my TBR, because Emma Cline writes in the most beautifully subtle way. The whole concept of The Guest is incredibly simple. We're following this girl called Alex. She's meandering. She is floating through life. She's a relatively unlikable character, which is an absolute buzzword for me. I love unlikable characters. If that's not your thing, you're not going to like this book, and that's okay. But I love an unlikable character. She is complex. She is very flawed. She never has a plan. She never has anywhere to stay at the end of the night, so her kind of day is spent finding somewhere to stay. A lot of the ways she achieves that is by manipulating people. And you follow this very dark but complex, interesting story of this woman trying to figure out life. It's relatively slow paced, but the character study is phenomenal. So if you like unlikable characters, if you like character-driven books, I really think this might be one for you. Emma Cline has this incredible way of writing things, and she really trusts her readers. She does this in the exact same way with her short story collection. She writes things and there is subtlety there, and she relies on the reader to pick up on it. She puts so much trust that her reader is intelligent enough to pick up on it, and she does it in a way that is absolutely breathtaking, and it makes you so captivated. I have seen this book advertised as a thriller. Personally, I'm in a disagreement. I think it is literary fiction through and through, and I've had a couple people in my comment section say the same thing, but I do know that it is kind of marketed that way, and I see in some senses the kind of psychological thriller element, but I personally think it follows way more of a literary feel. Either way, whether it's a thriller or a literary, I loved it. In at number 8, she wrote my favourite book of last year. Of course she's in the list again this year. We have Eliza Clark with Penance. Last year I read what I believe is her debut novel, which was Boy Parts. That book is one of the best books I have ever read. I had the highest of expectations going into her next book, Penance. They were absolutely met, despite the fact that this book could not be more different from her debut. This book is incredibly difficult to explain, but such a unique concept. We're basically following an unreliable narrator who is telling the story of a true crime case. Now, it's not a real true crime case, but it's presented as one. And we're basically following these 3 girls who murdered another girl. You get this incredible deep dive into each of their lives, maybe why they did some of the things that they did. It literally feels like watching a Netflix true crime documentary, except that it's not real. And one of the really cool things about this book is right at the start, you get this pretend foreword that says that the author, who is a man called Alec, so not Eliza Clark, the pretend author of this book, there's a pretend foreword. Gosh, it sounds so complicated when I say it. It's not that complicated. The foreword says that Alec's book has previously been taken off of shelves because they don't know how reliable the information is. They think bits of it are made up, exaggerated, whatever. So you're reading this whole book not really knowing what is true and what has been fictionalized for the sake of making a book. There are incredible conversations had in this book, but it's also just gripping. It's dark as anything, and the characters are relatively unlikable, so in that sense it's similar to Eliza Clark's debut. The writing will keep you on the edge of your seat. I flew through this. I will read anything Eliza Clark writes. She doesn't miss. I'm pretty sure she has a short story collection coming out soon. Short stories are not my favourite thing in the world, but there are a few writers like Emma Cline, like Eliza Clark, where because I will read anything they write, I will tackle the short stories, so I'm quite excited for that. Book number 7 is quite possibly the only book in this list that is not a literary fiction. I know. We have the only thriller gracing this list, and of course it's Lisa Jewell with None of This Is True. This was her 2023 release. I think it came out right at the end of last year. I read it this year because I'm terrible at reading new releases. Everyone who has watched me before will know I love Lisa Jewell. I do think this is her best work yet. In this one, we're following Alex and Josie, and they discover that they are birthday twins. And it's sort of a woman-obsessed story, which you know I love. Josie basically gets this glimpse into Alex's life. She is seeing what she sees as a direct comparison to her life. They were born in the same place on the same day, but their lives are so different. Alex runs a podcast, and Josie pitches to Alex that Alex should tell her life story. She says, I'm trying to change my life. why don't you document it? So they start doing that. As Alex starts recording the episodes with Josie, she realises that this was maybe not such a good idea. I listened to the audiobook. I could not recommend the audiobook enough. I genuinely think that is the perfect way to consume this story. This book is relatively mixed media. There's lots of podcast segments and interviews. I really, really recommend the audiobook. It is absolutely fabulous. The audiobook narrators are great. It is so fast paced. It is one of the only audiobooks where I was just listening to it. Normally I stick an audiobook on. I do other stuff while I listen. This book, I was seated, I was sat, I was listening because I was that hooked. And also one of the beauties of Lisa Jewell is that yes, the story absolutely has the classic thriller pace, but she has this depth to the characters that feels and reads like a literary fiction. But the beauty of the characters is because there is so much emotional depth to them, you care about their outcomes, which makes the thrilling elements so much more thrilling. I love Lisa Jewell. I've read a few of her books this year. I do think that this is my favourite she's ever written. If you've never read a Lisa Jewell book, I beg you start with this one. Alright, back to literary fiction. In at number 6, we have Cleopatra and Frankenstein by Coco Mellors. This book did take me a relatively long time to read. The text is tiny and the pace is relatively slow, and yet I was captivated. In this book, we're following Cleo, who is a 20-something student. She's an artist and she's kind of a bit lost in life. And then she meets Frank, he's a lot older, 20 years older to be precise. And they kind of have this chance meeting. You follow in the first chapter their very first meeting. And then they rush into a marriage knowing very little about each other. The writing style of this book is super unique because every other chapter we follow completely in depth a side character. So you might follow Frank's sister for a chapter, you might follow a friend of Cleo's for a chapter, and then you never come back to them. They appear a little bit, but you never get the same depth to them. It's such an interesting way of telling a story because you're getting this through line of Cleo and Frank's marriage, which is very tumultuous, toxic, problematic, and then you're getting all of these side characters, and I suppose the point is how Frank and Cleo's relationship is affecting these other people, but it also has this incredible way of highlighting how even the side characters have so much going on in their life, and you go so in depth into all of those elements and then you never see them again. The characters are definitely questionable, morally grey. Some would say unlikable. I would say some of them are definitely unlikable. Some are more likeable than others, but everyone is flawed. No one is perfect. You might be starting to sense the theme here. It's literary fiction and it's unlikable characters. It is not going to be for everybody, but I do think if you like unlikable characters, messy relationships, problematic people doing problematic things, and excellent writing, check it out. Alright, we're halfway through. In at number 5. Honestly, a book that took me so by surprise. I found it in a charity shop. I had never heard of it, although I now know that it's actually super popular. Don't know how I missed it. I picked it up on an absolute whim and I fell in love. That is Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine by Gail Honeyman. I struggle to talk about this book because the blurb gives you nothing. It says that Eleanor Oliphant is living a relatively mundane life. It suggests that she's maybe not that happy. Other than that, it tells you nothing. I really like books about people struggling with mundanity. It's a very niche genre, I'll give you that, but I really, really like it, which is why I picked it up. And this book is absolutely that, and at the same time, so much more. We basically get this character who maybe in the first few chapters comes across relatively unlikable, and by the end, the character arc is so complex and interesting that you feel terrible for having thought one singular bad thing about this character. There are so many incredible side plots in this book. It feels to me like a literary fiction, but it moves with pace. A lot of these books are relatively character driven and slow paced, and I really, really like that, but I know it's not for everyone. I think if you're wanting something that maybe still has those complexities that the other books have, but moves at pace, I think this is for you. I don't know if this would be classed as a literary fiction. It's definitely contemporary fiction. The conversations that are had in this and the way the characters are explored feels literary to me, but it's definitely leaning more towards just straight contemporary fiction. Everybody I've spoken to in my comments is obsessed with this. I'm obsessed with this. It took me so by surprise. I need everyone to pick this up because I'm literally yet to come across a person who didn't like this book. I haven't found one. If you're out there, feel free to make yourself known, but I don't think they exist. This book is stunning. I am waiting patiently, not very patiently, for Gail Honeyman to release something else. I believe she has something coming out next year. End of next year. I believe it's still a long way away. This was perfect. I need everyone to read it. Moving on to number 4, we have a book that I think will divide people. You're either going to love this book or it's really not going to be your thing. And that's fine either way, but let me tell you, it was absolutely my thing. We have Bunny by Mona Awad. This book is an absolute fever dream. It is mind-boggling, confusing, great. We're following Samantha, who joins a writing program at her university. The program that she's on is really, really tiny, so it's basically just her and this group of girls who are very tight. They call themselves the Bunnies. They're a little strange. Samantha hates them. She wants nothing to do with them. She couldn't care less about them until they invite her to a party. And yes, she absolutely goes. She goes to this party and gets sucked into this very strange cult. Besides that, I'm going to struggle to explain this plot to you because it is confusing. It's meant to be. You have to go in with an open mind and just trust that Mona Awad has got you, because it is going to feel like being in open water and randomly swimming and you don't really know where you're going, but trust Mona Awad knows. I feel like I may be overselling how confusing it is. You know what's going on, you just don't know what's going on. Yeah, there is absolutely a through line, but you just get points in the book where things are so confused. For example, we have a section of the book where you actually don't know who the main character is anymore. She's called Samantha, but she gets to a point where she's so sucked into this cult that they're all called Bunny and you can't really tell which one is Samantha. They're just referring to everyone as Bunny. So it's things like that. It's not to the point where you're going to be reading it thinking, I just don't know what's going on, what's the point of this? Or at least that wasn't my experience. It goes super confusing and then it pulls you out just enough to say, hey, this is what's going on. And then you dive right on back in. Give it a go, see what you think. I know it's not going to be for everybody, but this is probably, of every book I've read this year, the book that I think about the most. So take it that what you will. We're into top 3. The 3rd best book I read this year was, of course, Conversations with Friends by Sally Rooney. Also, Normal People by Sally Rooney. Also, Beautiful World, Where Are You by Sally Rooney. Yeah, okay, I'm sorry. I am giving 3rd place joint to all of Sally Rooney's works. I'm sorry. Is that cheating? Yes. Yes, it is, but it's my list and I make the rules. So technically this is my top 13, but I don't care. I couldn't pick. I tried. I really, really tried. At one point I was thinking maybe Conversations was my favourite because it was the first one I read. I can't pick. So all of them win. All of them equally 3rd place. I love them. I'm obsessed. I'm obsessed. I'm obsessed. I cannot believe that I had not read a Sally Rooney book until this year. And yes, I binged all 3 of her books this year. Yes, Intermezzo has just come out. If you've seen any of my recent videos, you know my conundrum. I haven't got a hold of it yet. I'm trying. But let me tell you, Sally Rooney does complicated relationships, messy characters, like no one else. I fell in love with her writing this year. They all kind of follow similar concepts. You're following generally people in their 20s getting into, generally speaking, pretty complicated relationships. They're fairly slow pace, I guess. They're very character driven over plot. The way Sally Rooney writes, it just does something to my brain. Every single one of these books I left feeling sad. Definitely sad. I cannot explain to you my love for Sally Rooney. I fell in love with her this year. I will read anything she writes, literally anything. I could not be more excited for Intermezzo. It sounds a little different to these 3. I have also heard only 3 reviews of Intermezzo, but every single one of those reviews has said it's her best work yet. I don't know if that's true. I've only read these 3, but I am obsessed. Every single one of these was 5 stars for me. All right, moving on to book number 2. I think this book is pretty widely loved, so I don't think it's necessarily going to be a surprise. This year I finally read Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. Even thinking about this book, I get almost giddy with how much I love it. I feel like the more I love the book, the less I have to say on it, because it's just a feeling, and I can't just sit here and say, I love this book, please read it. But that's all I want to say. This book follows Sam and Sadie. It's described as being a love story, but not a romance. I think that's fairly accurate. There's no real romance through line, but you are following several different types of love. We're following Sam and Sadie, who are basically making a gaming business, and then their friend Marks also comes on, and it's kind of the three of them building this company. It's about gaming. You don't need to know anything about gaming. I don't know anything about gaming, but it was still one of the best elements of this book. One of my favourite things about this book was how the author explores some characters working on something they love and building something they love, and you get to watch them succeed and you get to watch their failures. That is something I adore more than anything. This book feels so passionate. You can see how passionate these characters are. The talent that Gabrielle Zevin has for writing characters who are complicated and flawed at times, they're definitely not perfect, but you will fall in love with them, and then she will crush your heart. There is a scene in this which I don't think I will ever get over. It broke me to pieces. If you've seen the reading vlog, you've seen it. Even thinking about it gives me goosebumps. I literally have goosebumps right now. I love this book. It is, without a shadow of a doubt, one of the best books I've ever read. It was voted, I think, in both lists of the New York Times best books of the 21st century. I'm pretty sure it was in both the critics list and the readers list, which I think says quite a lot. It is critically acclaimed, but also readers enjoy it. It's a good book. I don't know what else to say to convince you to read this book, but just please trust me, it is breathtaking. Before we move on to book number 1, I'm just going to take this opportunity to say that you should probably subscribe so you can see all the books I read next year. I'm just saying, it seems like a good opportunity to do it. I'll give you 30 seconds. Okay, I'm assuming you did it. We're going to move on to book number 1. If you've been following me throughout this year, I do not think this book is going to come as a surprise to you. I said when I read it that there is a very good chance it will be the best book that I read this year, and guess what? I was right. That book is, of course, My Year of Rest and Relaxation by Ottessa Moshfegh. This is a tiny little book. She is just under 300 pages, and it is one of the best things that I've ever read in my entire life. How do you describe this book? We're following an unnamed woman, and she has just lost her parents, and she is in a really deep depression. Basically, her entire goal in life is to sleep as much as possible because she doesn't want to be awake. It's an incredibly sad book, but the conversations about depression, privilege are breathtaking. I will say, not a whole lot happens in this book. The majority of it is set in her apartment, and we're following her trying to reach this goal of being able to sleep as much as physically possible. It's an incredibly hard-hitting, sad book, but I think it is written in just the most breathtaking way. I cannot wait to read more of Ottessa Moshfegh because I think I'm going to fall in love with her. I feel for book number 1 I should have more to say, but like I said for tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow, the more I like about a book, the less I can articulate the reasons I liked it. This character is not very likeable. Again, you're getting the theme. I like books about unlikable characters. She's not a particularly likeable character. She does a lot of very questionable things. In fact, I'm not sure there's anybody in this book who is likeable, but everybody is so well written. The character study is fabulous. I want to have this book tattooed onto my body. I don't even have tattoos, but I would do that. I've just bought Eileen by this author. I cannot wait to read it. I cannot wait to read everything on her backlist. I think she's incredible. There you have it. Of all the books I've read this year, these are my favourites. There's a definite theme. I like literary fiction. I like unlikable characters. I like messy relationships. I think that is reflected in this list. If you've read any of these books, please let me know. Tell me your thoughts. Let's have a chat about them. I love chatting about these books. Whether or not you agree with me, that's fine. I'm always down for a conversation about books. As I said at the start of this video, the next video coming out is going to be every single book that I've read this year, so stick around for that. Subscribe if you haven't already so you can catch that video. It's going to be a long one. We read a lot of books. Thank you so much for being here. I cannot wait for next year's reading. I have so many books on my TBR that I'm just so excited to get to. I think this year, more than any other year, I have really established my reading taste and what I like, and I'm very good now, I think, at knowing what I'm going to enjoy. Obviously you get the odd book where you don't gel with the writing style or something about it just doesn't end up vibing with you, but more times than not now, I like the books I'm reading, which is great because that's the goal. And I think this year particularly, I really established what I love. And what I love is unlikable characters. Anyway, thank you so much for being here. Subscribe if you haven't already, like the video, comment down below, all that fun stuff, and I'll catch you in the next one. I love you, goodbye!